Alright guys, welcome back. Kind of follow up on the first video I did where we really talked about individual letters, and I'm going to go through a couple ideas and techniques for drawing a word and how letters interact with one another. Similar to yesterday, you're going to need a pencil, paper, and eraser. You'll probably be asked to use your eraser a little bit more here. Pause it whenever you need to help yourself draw. I'll give you suggestions of what I'm going to ask you to do, though we are going to kind of build upon the same drawing as opposed to drawing small examples over and over. Alright, let's go. Alright, so yesterday's lesson again emphasized the idea of the line structure, that you can add style to that line structure, and that we break them apart and view them as shapes. So as I do this, I'm going to be a little creative with my lines, and I'm going to kind of draw them separately. Right, so I wrote the word art. I gave it a little bit of an organic feel, some curved lines to it, and I'm going to start building around those with shapes. And again, I want to be consistent. An important part of this is going to be keeping a consistent weight to the letters and a style to letters. So I started out wider, got thinner. It's going to kind of keep that idea throughout them. A little wider at the bottom, a little thinner at the top. This one will start wide and get thin. And this one was wide on the top and bottom and a little thinner in the middle. Right now I still want to see them as these separate parts, so I don't want to go too far. I'm not going to erase anything yet for the purpose of you guys seeing it. Let's trace these out. When I draw my letters, something that's going to be important is that I start to push things together. So I'm letting this R overlap my letter A here, or the bottom of this R kicks in front of it. So it feels a little cluttered, and that's okay. We want to really start to have them be kind of cluttered like this, because now they're interacting. If you leave a lot of space between them, it's a little harder to get your letters to interact with one another. So the first thing that I end up dealing with when I get to here is, how do I want my letters to layer? Because I drew them as these transparent overlapping objects, I now get to decide with an eraser what letter sits in front of what. Do I want the A to go over the R, in which case, or it could have been the other way around. The R could go over it here. Right, the other way around looks a little different. It's totally up to you. Sometimes what happens in the world of graffiti is letters will connect. You erase both of them. So now the letter A was here and linked right into that letter R. I'll clean this up so it's a little easier to see. And it's all linked together. Sometimes when you link letters together it can look great, especially if they're just overlapping a little bit. But sometimes you lose too much information. So sometimes what people do is leave part of the letter. I'm going to leave this part of my R kicking out here, but leave this space open. So the letters are still linked together, but there's just enough information to define that back end of the R. Another kind of fun option is I could take that component of the R and I could chop it off. And so now that letter R punctures through that letter A. A lot of options for you, but it starts with making sure you draw your letters so that they're overlapping one another. Or butting up against one another. And again, sometimes, let's say I had an A that looks like this, and then an R. Sometimes if they overlap a ton and you erase all that space, it's too much, right? It's a little hard to see what letters those were, and so some of that information is important. Again, I can define in the bottom of this A or the top of that R, still leave the middle here separate so they're linked together or connected. There's just enough definition so that we can see what letter is what as they try to connect. What I'm going to ask you guys to try right now is, again, pick a 3-letter word. If you already know what word you're going to write for your own drawing, pick 3 letters of that word. You don't have to try to write the whole word, although it's all about how much time you want to put into this. I'm going to use the word art for all my examples. Go ahead and write your word. Keep the letters pretty basic. Don't get into letters that are jagged forms that are all wobbly right now. Keep them nice and kind of basic first. These had a little bit of style, a little organic style to them, but nothing too fancy. Try to make sure you push them so that they're up against one another or overlapping one another. Go ahead and do that now. While you do that, I'm going to clean up the rest of this so that we can see how the letters are working together here. Alright, so I cleaned up my drawing a bit. I kept the R puncturing through the A here. I kept this connected for now. I let this have a little bit of a connection. See the top of the T, but I still wanted to make sure that top of the R was there. I felt like if I left it as just the letter T coming all the way through, too much of the R was missing. That's pretty important. So I wanted to keep that letter R. And I connected the bottom of the T into the kind of leg of the R kicking out. Alright, so the next concept I want us to think about. This concept is something we see very much in graffiti and in wild style graffiti. It's the concept of an extension. The basic idea is if this is the core structure of my letter, an extension takes any one of these shapes and extends them. It goes further than what that is. And it's just for creative extras. It's just for embellishment to make it more appealing to you, the artist, and hopefully to the viewer as well. So this letter here could, instead of stopping here, something could extend out the side of it, or maybe it extends and zigzags over here. Maybe this one dips all the way down and out, or this one comes down and around. All these extra things grow off of that core structure, which was the very simple letter A. So I can do that same thing here with these letters. Instead of the letter stopping here, I would erase the bottom of that bar, or that shape, and I'm going to imagine that this kind of keeps going out this way. So I'm going to draw this here, and again I'm just going to draw right through my letters for now. I'm going to swoop it all the way over here. And again, you can do this with any of these shapes. Some common things that we sometimes see in the world of graffiti is some like kind of quick, thin looping extension. So it ends here. Just going to drop that down. So it got real thin as it comes through, and then maybe opens back up. And I'll add an arrow form to that. Let's think of that kind of serif lesson from last time. Add an arrow form there. Or maybe even this one comes up to an arrow form over here or something. So now I'm going to extend the top of this A and just connect that right into that letter R. So that's all going to link together there. That's a nice little flow to it. And then if I wanted this one to come out here, I could. And again, I'm trying to play with that same arrow form, because if I keep using that arrow, it'll give it a little bit more consistent style. So this is the A coming across. And then I have it come across and then somehow connect into this top of the T. So again, you can add extensions and then connect. And the more you do, the wilder it starts to get, the kind of crazier it'll start to feel. Sometimes you might do so much of this that it's hard to read the letters. I'm sure at some point this might start to feel this way, and that's okay. It's always easiest to do this at the front and back of the word. There's all this extra space here, so it's easier to push some stuff out this way. You just don't want it to push too far away from it, or certainly not too far above or below it. Keeping it tight into the kind of frame will work really well for you. what I'd like you guys to try to do is, working with the words you already started, see if you can find 2 or 3 points that you could extend the letters. Again, front and back of the words, the easiest place to do this, but you can find space in the middle, just a little more cluttered and harder to sometimes fit it in. And see if you can add some extensions to your letters. Hit pause, you do that. When you unpause it, I'll get this one cleaned up so you can see it. Alright, so I got this cleaned up. I tried to leave some of the purple trim on the letters. Help identify what part are the extensions. One part that I kind of got this cross on the letter A that comes through, keeps going through the letters, passes over the R, and I've kind of looked at it and decided because it passes over this part of the R, really makes the R difficult to see. And so, again, using your eraser, you can easily kind of adapt this. But you always want to draw these shapes overlapping, kind of transparent. And so now, I try it like this. Crosses over that part of the R, then comes behind it. Makes it a little easier to see the letter R. Still a little confusing there. Or I could pass it behind it completely. I think I'm going to leave it like that for now. Even though that letter T is getting a little tough to read, we'll go with that for now. Another concept that's a little more specific to the world of graffiti, sometimes is called a bit. Sometimes bits are considered brackets or quotes when they show up on the ends of the word. A lot of different ways you could do it. A bit's usually just an extra piece that kind of adds on to a letter. They work really well where you have a flat ending. So if I have like this kind of flat component here to just kind of add an extra part of that letter, or a little bit that's kind of floating off of it. Sometimes you'll see just one single one, or you might see maybe a couple. Sometimes they'll be a little more offset, so it doesn't line up so perfect with it. Rectangles, polygons happen a lot. Sometimes you might see them as like a semicircle. So that bit broke off and it had a rounded top to it. There's no right or wrong here. The common thing I see amongst my students is they might overdo it. They might add like 6 or 7 of them drifting off. It might feel like it's a little overdone. I don't know if I like this one here. Just a couple bits there. So in a break, it kind of creates the same idea, except for the break breaks something that already exists. And so I have this like arrow form swooping down here, and if I just draw 2 lines through it and erase, sometimes a break might show up as just a line. Or maybe even like broken with a piece kind of popping out of it. So that's just a line break. I'm not actually separating the 2 parts. Sometimes breaks will actually look like something is like physically broken, like there was like a crack going through it. Now, similar to a lot of the other things that I've talked about, the trick to this often becomes be consistent. If I used a break that was just a line form, I should make that one show up a couple times rather than having one kind of zigzag line and one broken one and one with the piece coming out of it. A consistent style will gel together a lot better. So instead of doing a crack here, if I wanted to add a break, I might just do a line. And again, I'll come into some other parts and see if I can. And again, just like the extensions, be careful. If you add a break into an important part of the letter, it could get really difficult to read the word. If I take this letter here and add like a wide break to it, that letter A gets a little tougher to see. And so that might not be the best place to add a break, or if I do, maybe just keeping it simpler with just a simple line break. But again, being consistent with that will help them all gel together. Right now, again, look at your word, see if you can add some bits to your letter and add a break to your letter. Alright, so I got this a little more cleaned up. Cleaned up the breaks down here. I added a break up here. But it's certainly a far cry from where it was when it started before we added all these extras. And so you can see where by connecting the letters, making them interact, extending the letters, and also forcing those extensions to interact, adding some of these bits and breaks to it, you really do start to see the stereotypical graffiti look that's starting to take form here. And these all started as really basic letters before all this extra was added on to it. A couple little things that you can do here. A drip. You know, oftentimes a drip form looks like a droplet. It's no necessarily right or wrong to them. One thing I would suggest if you try to add some drips to your letter is don't make them all the same length. Give it some variety. And just like bits, the idea of like less is more. Do less of them. You don't need a ton of them to have it be an effective design in your letters. I might come into a letter here, add a little drip hanging off of that, and I'll just erase that letter. Naturally, gravity pulls things down, so your drips can go down. You could have one letter drip on top of another letter. You know, maybe this part's dripping down from this arrow hanging over that letter. Well, hopefully you got something out of this video. Again, be consistent. The goal is that you add consistent features to your letters, that they have kind of a nice even weight to them. These were thinner and thicker, and there's a lot of like thinner parts, thicker parts, thinner part, thicker part, thinner part, thicker part, to try to distribute the weight evenly. Similar features. The arrow forms really gelled it for me. Using the same style of bits throughout, as well as kind of like the basic structure was this slightly curved organic letter, slightly curved, slightly curved, slightly curved, slightly curved. That helped it all bond together. A couple of similar break forms, which feel a little isolated over here. I should probably find a way to add one in over here. Or maybe not. There you go. Hopefully you got a drawing out of this video. Next video I'm going to just talk to you about some overall art concepts to think about and word layout. I'm going to suggest that you take the knowledge you've gained from this and start creating a drawing of your own that you would like to see become a final copy that will eventually get to making 3D and coloring in. Thus concludes Graffiti with Mr. Mohegan Part 2.